Hi there, I'm Jim Zirin. Welcome back to more Conversations in the Digital Age. Ironically enough, two landmark events happened in 2016. The nomination of Hillary Clinton as the first female nominee for president of a major political party, and the death of conservative leader Phyllis Schlafly at age 92. Schlafly is reputed to have said, "There will be a woman president only over my dead body." With us is the brilliant broadcast journalist and writer Lynn Sherr. Lynn is a true pioneer in her field. She was the first woman to anchor a regularly scheduled primetime TV network news series for ABC News. Lynn, we're delighted to have you with us to compare and contrast the parallel but clashing universe of these two extraordinary women.
Thanks, Jim. And I have to just say, I was at ABC News for a long time, but my with a lot of qualifiers, first was actually at PBS. When I anchored that program, it was a weekly political show on PBS called USA People and Politics. And by the time I got to ABC, Barbara Walters was already there, who had cracked the evening news anchor barrier for women. So a lot of firsts going on.
Well, for me, you'll always be a trailblazer and a pioneer. Now, we have the nomination of Hillary Clinton for President of the United States. First time that's ever happened in our history. What went through your mind when she went up there to accept the nomination?
You know, I actually sound like Mrs. Clinton, don't I? You know, she starts, that's her little conversational tick. I had a lot of different reactions. On the one hand, let me just start by saying I am thrilled, and what took us so long, and it's about time. Why hasn't a woman been up there before when so many countries in this world have had female heads of state for so long? But my actual gut reaction when she went over the top, not at the convention, but when she went over the top, was I didn't at first feel the goosebumps for the following reason. I covered the campaign of Geraldine Ferraro in 1984 when she was the first woman to be nominated for vice president on a major party ticket. And I must tell you, then at that time, I felt the chill, I felt the thrill, I felt the goosebumps. It really was a sense of somebody finally representing us. I don't care whether you were Democrat, Republican, or anything in between. That was a very exciting moment. And out on the campaign trail, as a reporter, I could have my feelings and I could perfectly well cover her honestly and fairly. Millions of people at these rallies over time, Democrats, Republicans, everything, holding up their babies and just saying, look what you can do. That's when Ferraro was nominated for vice president. With Hillary Clinton, after she spoke at the Brooklyn Navy Yard, I started to feel it. And at the convention, I definitely felt it, because finally, after all these 2.5 centuries of time, we're up there with the rest of the world, and we're trying to give women an equal place in our political game. And I guess my real reaction is it's about time.
It's about time. Well, you know, there'd been attempts before, because Ferraro ran for vice president, but right. Shirley Chisholm.
Right. Well, we've had over the years.
Margaret Chase Smith.
Well, go back even further. 1872, the very first woman to run for president of the United States, a woman named Victoria Woodhull, kind of a dashing, flamboyant woman, a publisher. She was into fortune telling and seeing the future, and her campaign was really not taken very seriously, but she did it. And then you had a woman named Belva Lockwood, who was an attorney, who ran in 1882, 1888, and she didn't get very far either. And then the first serious one in this century was certainly Margaret Chase Smith, a Republican. And when she did it, she actually helped perpetrate this myth a little bit. She was a terrific woman, a congresswoman, a senator from Maine, a rock rib Republican. And when she ran, the headline was that Margaret Chase Smith tossed her bonnet into the ring. And I actually think she had a bonnet, so it was kind of her fault. But the press loved doing this, the mostly male press. You know, let's show the little woman. So she wasn't throwing her hat in the ring, it was her bonnet in the ring. And then we have Shirley Chisholm, who decided to run as a test case. And this was 1972. And I was then a reporter for the Associated Press. And I sat in at a meeting, a planning meeting, when she was going to do all this stuff on the floor of the convention. And in fairness, women didn't quite know what they were doing, but she got it done. My favorite line from Shirley Chisholm about running was, someone said to her, well, what will make the difference with you in the White House? Well, she said, well, for one thing, it won't be a White House anymore.
That's a great line. Now, you wrote in your piece for BillMoyers.com, entitled It's About Time, that feminism was not Hillary's platform, it was in her DNA. Now, how do you distinguish between a candidate's platform and their DNA?
Well, I think Secretary Clinton did it herself in her one of her books. She said, Bill talked about social change, I embody it. And there's the difference. Hillary Clinton is a woman who has done and fought for, and sometimes won and sometimes lost, all the things that the modern women's movement has fought for, which is equal representation, which is getting women in government, which is equal pay, which is standing up and speaking before a group. I mean, all these things that were demands are things that she's done with her life. And she's always expressed enormous concern for other women. One thing you can say about her, many things you can say about her, but for sure you can say about her, she never wanted to be the only woman doing it. She always wanted to bring other women along with her. And this was one of the things we used to say in the women's movement back when it started back in the late 60s, early 70s, was that it wasn't just about one person alone. We were doing it for everyone after us. So my generation was kicking in a lot of glass doors and ceilings for the next group that was coming up after us. And that's what makes it work.
Well, throughout history, women have been tremendously influential in government and politics without holding political office,
right?
Necessarily.
Well, yes. And in fact, that's what happened after the passage of the 19th Amendment, which of course gave us the right to vote in 1920.
1920, think of it.
My mother was born without the right to vote. Think about that. Yeah. And probably yours too. I mean, if you were born
yes, indeed,
before 1920 in this country, some states gave the vote to their women before the country as a whole did. But my mother was born in Pennsylvania and she did not have the right to vote. At any rate, once women had the right to vote, a lot of people started looking and saying, okay, let's see what they're going to do with that vote. Is there going to be a woman's bloc? And there wasn't. And for a long time, there was no women's vote. And so many people, historians, started saying, oh, well, this was all a big failure. Women have simply not taken advantage of this. In fact, what happened is that rather than run for office and rather than be up front, women then got into the parties and started working behind the scenes and started making the parties work. And without that groundwork, you would not have had the ability for Margaret Chase Smith and everybody who came after her. She was hardly the first, by the way, in the Senate or in Congress. So there were women working behind the scenes, and it was because of the groundwork they laid that more women could then come in and run for the upfront offices.
But then, of course, they made advances in government without necessarily running for office. You had
right.
The appointment of Sandra Day O'Connor as the first female justice.
A huge step forward for women because she was a great feminist, is a great feminist, made great decisions, and understood exactly what that ruling would be. You know, I did an interview with Ruth Bader Ginsburg some years ago while she was on the court, and I asked her what it was like about being the second woman on the court, and she said, well, it was great because Sandra Day O'Connor, she and Ruth Bader Ginsburg became quite close friends, and that O'Connor really paved the way for Ginsburg. And Ginsburg said, but I wonder about the government. She said, you know, when I became a justice, they immediately rushed around to enlarge the robing room because now there were 2 women. And now that there are 3, I hope they've enlarged it even more. But she said at one point...
Well, that's to your point about opening the door for other women.
Absolutely.
Sandra Day O'Connor, then there were
Absolutely.
3 women who followed on the Supreme Court.
And that's what it's always about. It's always about making it available for the point of the modern women, the point of the suffrage movement in the 19th century was to get all women not only the right to vote, but equal rights. It was for all women. It was not for a few. The point of the modern women's movement in the 70s was exactly the same, to open the doors, to smooth the path for so many other people. And you know, when I go around the country sometimes and I get interviewed by local female anchors on morning television shows around the country, they almost all say to me, thank you, they get it, they understand that if it weren't for the generation or 2 above them, they couldn't have their jobs.
Well, do you think there should be 9 women on the Supreme Court? Ginsburg said...
why not?
Why not? Ginsburg said we've had 9 men for a long time.
What do you
They
think?
haven't always been perfect.
I think it's a great idea.
Great idea.
Yeah.
Probably will not happen, but a great idea nonetheless.
You know what I love? I love all this conversation about whether the country is ready for something. So the question was always, is the country ready for a woman president? Well, of course the country was ready for a woman. So then we have, is the country ready for 2 women on the ticket? Right? Could you have a female presidential and a
Could
vice
Elizabeth
president?
Warren have run?
Exactly. Well, a lot of people said, well, we don't think the country's ready for that. And the problem is that people are readier than government often thinks they are. I think the people are always ahead of the laws, and that's how the laws get changed.
Well, do you think ready is really a euphemism for misogyny
I think
in political
absolutely.
campaigns?
In many
I mean, even we
cases.
said, were we ready for a black president?
In many cases, exactly.
Concern was that whites would not vote for a black president.
Can I give you one more of my favorite Shirley Chisholm lines? When she was running for president, Ed Koch, who was then our mayor, said to her, Shirley, can I be your vice president? And Shirley Chisholm said to Ed Koch, I'm sorry, Ed, I don't think the country is ready for a Jewish vice president. Is that wonderful?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Well, you know, Bloomberg counted himself out for, among other reasons, that he was Jewish and he didn't think, I guess he thought the country wasn't ready.
And
Short
he said
and divorced
or split from his wife, whatever.
And a billionaire. And,
Yeah.
and then Bernie Sanders was divorced and was Jewish and almost captured the nomination.
Well, I think these are things we have to reconsider our language, and we have to reconsider what the country is ready for. I think we have an extraordinary country that can roll with the punches and that can be ready for whatever is presented to them.
Well, then we have women who excelled in other fields in the 20th century. Sally Ride, first woman in space.
First American woman in space.
American woman in
Absolutely.
space.
And that, you know, NASA, it took NASA a little bit longer than it took the rest of the world. Sally Ride and her classmates, there were 6 women in the class that Sally was selected for to become astronaut trainees. I mean, that was 1978. By then, Harvard, Yale, Princeton were integrated with women. By then, many barriers had been broken. It took a little longer to
But
get
not
women
Wellesley,
into
your
NASA.
alma mater.
We don't admit men. We have many men on the campus at Wellesley, my alma mater.
There were always men on the campus at Wellesley,
That's
but
true.
not
But
matriculated.
we don't let them get degrees. We still believe it should be a women-only college.
Okay, so we now have women in the armed forces and combat roles. We have women becoming much more influential in the media. The recent succession of Jane Pauley for Charles Osgood.
Which is so interesting because for the first time, a woman in her 60s has taken, you know, a job on television for the first. I mean, that's wonderful. Congratulations to Jane, and again, it opens the door for other women of a similar age to do the same thing.
So you agree with Bob Dylan that the times are changing?
Not fast enough.
Not fast enough. Okay, so we have Hillary Clinton running for president, and there are factors that enter into her candidacy other than her gender. Mm-hmm. The New York Times, endorsing her editorially, talked about her capacity to rise to the challenges we face, her 40 years of experience, determination, tenacity, record of achievement, she's probably the most highly qualified person to
No
seek
question.
the presidency
And
since George H.W. Bush, who had an impressive resume.
Mr. Resume, we used to call him. Hillary Clinton's achievements are extraordinary. And let me point out one huge difference that shows you how far, in fact, we have traveled. When Geraldine Ferraro was the vice presidential nominee, she was asked point blank on Meet the Press on television. I forget the beginning of the question. The clear implication was, as a woman, do you have what it takes? And now I'm quoting directly, could you press the nuclear button? The question was, could a woman do something so manly, whatever that is? So that was 1984. Here we are in 2016, and it is Hillary Clinton who is saying, I don't trust Donald Trump to press the nuclear button. So all of a sudden, what a contrast to go from could a woman do it to a woman saying this guy can't do it. Very interesting change.
Yes. Well, the whole campaign has been conducted on a sexist level, hasn't it?
I think so, yeah.
Unapologetically so. Trump's degrading comments about women, his talking about Hillary as a gunshot target, attacks on her integrity, crooked Hillary, lock her up.
Of course,
tremendous amount of misogyny, which do you think that would have existed had his opponent been a male?
Well, I was about to say, he's sort of an equal opportunity insulter, and he's certainly through some very ugly comments towards his competitors in the Republican primary. I think there's a level of ignorance from his side and a level of just pure dumbness and a level of great misogyny. And I don't think there's any question about it. I think some of that insult would exist for anybody, but a lot of it is because she's female. And I've actually had a hard time trying to figure out the following question. We've almost lost sight of the fact that if Hillary Clinton wins, she would be the first female president of this country. And the femaleness of it and the excitement of the first woman has sort of gotten lost in all the junk about this campaign. And there has been a lot of misogyny. And I don't know if that's wiped it out or if we've just put it on hold. I don't know where we are on that particular thing. I will say clearly the misogyny is there. I mean, for instance, when Pat Schroeder, Congresswoman from Colorado, once ran for president, and someone said to her, "Are you going to be running as a woman?" And Pat said, "Well, I don't know that I have a choice." And when Trump says about Hillary, she's playing the woman card, I haven't a clue what he's talking about, except perhaps that he's not playing with a full deck. I mean, I don't know what's going on there. Playing the woman card. She's a woman. She cares about women's issues. Of course she's going to talk about women's issues. That's not the woman card.
And of course, a man should care about women's issues as well, running for office.
Well, you're a feminist, aren't you, Jim?
Well, I'd like to think so.
Absolutely.
Now,
so there you are.
Now, a woman, however, who died just recently, Phyllis Schlafly, did not share your view or my view of what women want or where they should be going. What do you make of her opposition to the ERA? And I remind you that Trump attended her funeral and said she was the leader of a movement.
Yeah, Trump attended her funeral, said she was the leader of a movement, and the first tweet he sent out offering not quite his condolences on her death, but mentioning her death, he referred to his good friend and great supporter, Phyllis Schlafly, as Phillies, as in the baseball team Schlafly. So then he corrected it later on when somebody taught him how to spell.
Well, as an old Philadelphian, you were able to make that distinction. So.
Well, I never remember her on the ball field, and I go back to Robin Roberts and Jimmy and Richie Ashburn. So that was my team. Phyllis Schlafly in the 70s became a fierce opponent of the Equal Rights Amendment when I believe, when she saw it connecting to her larger goal, which was the conservative movement and talking about stuff relating to that. And her big issue about stopping the ERA, and her organization was called Stop ERA, was that it would lead to
The Equal Rights Amendment.
The Equal Rights Amendment was that it would lead to unisex bathrooms. This was the big issue.
The kind we have in almost every home in the United States.
Bingo!
And the kind Sally Ride had when she was in space.
Well, I mean, my favorite moment, as you know, I covered the space program for ABC, and when Sally Ride was named to be the first American woman to fly in space, there was a wonderful political cartoon, and it was Phyllis Schlafly out there on the launch pad. This is 1981, or she was probably named in 80 because she flew in 81. Phyllis Schlafly out there on the launch pad, shaking her fist at a NASA engineer saying, "But will there be separate bathrooms?" You know, everybody was lucky there was one bathroom on the space shuttle. It was also, can I read you? There's a tweet. There was a lot of tweeting around when Phyllis Schlafly died, many condolences. And then somebody tweeted this: R.I.P. Phyllis Schlafly. No woman ever worked so tirelessly, ventured so far on behalf of the belief that other women should do none of that. And that's the way she was looked at from the people who she was opposed to, which was, she said women should be home, women should be cooking for their men, let the men make the money. She was out on the stump, speaking, campaigning, writing books, earning money, doing exactly what she said other women should not be doing.
Well, of course, she had 6 children and a family, and she went to law school at age 51.
Yeah, well, very accomplished woman. I take none of that from her. I express my condolences to her family and friends, but what she stood for was so antithetical. She was simply on the wrong side of history. Everything she opposed is coming around.
Did the defeat of ERA hurt women and women's rights and the women's cause?
I think it was a setback for a while. But
only 3 votes.
But yes, but what women figured out and what feminists figured out, men and women, was that you could go other directions. In other words, you didn't need the equal rights for everything. I still think we need it for some things, but they figured out ways to get around it. It would have taken a lot less time. Equal Rights Amendment would have done it much more quickly. It's taken longer, but with luck, we'll get there the same way.
So what are the major issues confronting women right now?
Well, I think we still have equal pay issues. I don't believe you can legislate attitude. So we can't ever, we're never going to totally get rid of how people feel and react. There is huge misogyny. There are things said about Hillary Clinton that would never be said about a male candidate. And they're said not only by the candidate opposing her, but by his supporters and by other people.
Well, that's why he says them, because it's throwing red meat to the faithful. But what do you suppose is the source of the misogyny? Is it the men's experience in life, or we're going back to the Garden of Eden? How did this all
Well, Jim,
happen?
I think we might need to do another couple of programs for that. But, words that have been thrown around by people way smarter than I on the human mind and sociology are words like vulnerability and insecurity and fear. There is some men, I don't know any, perhaps you do, get nervous when a woman is stronger than they are. Some men.
But some women get nervous when a man is stronger than they are.
Oh, yeah.
We're talking about human nature. We're not talking about gender.
It's also silly. And I have to tell you, I've been saying for a long time that I thought it was generational. That I thought as soon as, I see a difference in my kids in the way they deal with their children. And I see my grandchildren treat each other much more equally in terms of gender, race, sexuality, you name it. And I do think a lot of it is generational. But I also think that there was a disturbing article recently that said that millennial men had plenty of misogyny left in them. And that makes me very unhappy. So we still have, I don't know if we still have doors to kick open. We have ceilings to crash through. Mostly what we need to do is be able to talk to each other and understand each other better, because that's probably where it's going to wind up.
Well, is it a natural thing that men harbor this distrust and hatred of women? Is it a competitive thing?
I mean, are they born with it?
They don't want women in the work. Historically, a lot of the animus toward minority groups is that they would take jobs away.
Right,
there was an economic threat. So
well, and you remember, of course, after World War II, because you've read about it, I don't suggest because you were old enough to have been there, but after World War II, when the women had gone to take all the men's jobs when they went overseas to fight in World War II.
Rosie the Riveter.
Rosie the Riveter, but everywhere. Women liked it. Women liked working and earning a paycheck. And what had to happen to get them back in the home was the government essentially had to mandate it. And companies then, that's when GE came out with how wonderful it is to be a homemaker and how fabulous it is to open the refrigerator door and see. And there was this whole push to make homemaking seem like the best of all possible worlds. No knock against homemaking. I love, my mother was a stay-at-home mom, and I love all of that. But these women finally discovered they had a choice, and they wanted a choice, but it was kind of mandated that they go back home.
Well, unfortunately, we have to wrap up because this has been just marvelous. But I have a question for you, Lynn
Okay.
Sherr. Hillary Clinton and Phyllis Schlafly, two women in the 21st century in a parallel universe. Which point of view do you think is going to prevail?
I think it's an easy answer. Clearly, it's Hillary Clinton's point of view because history's already shown that almost everything Phyllis Schlafly stood for in terms of women's issues has changed and gone against her.
History's on the side of the feminists.
No question in my mind.
Lynn Sherr, thank you so much for coming by.
Thank you, Jim.
And thank you for coming by. Tune in next week for more conversations in the digital age. I'm Jim Zirin. All the best.